before we get into the more serious conversations, I would like to have a small rant about the casting decisions in Jane Austen adaptations. And that is that adaptations insist on casting certain characters as being very old, and they are not old. Mrs. Bennet is a great example of this. Mrs. Bennet is described as being, or as having gotten married at a young age. She has 5 daughters. Her eldest daughter, Jane, is 20, 21 maybe. So we can, I think, safely say that Mrs. Bennet was probably around 20 when she had Jane, which means that Mrs. Bennet is 40 years old. 45 tops, right? 45 tops. And yet, she is constantly cast by much older actresses. In the 1995 adaptation and the 2005 adaptation, she was played by a 50-year-old and a 60-year-old woman. Now, I have nothing against older women. That is not the problem. The problem is that it changes our understanding of who the character is if we're going to cast older women in a role of a middle-aged woman. That's the problem. Mrs. Bennet is a very silly woman, but she's not an old woman. Same thing happens, except worse, with Lady Catherine de Bourgh. Lady Catherine's daughter is, 18, 20, roughly? She's described as having just come of an age when she would have come out. 18, 20, maybe 25 tops. Again, Lady Catherine probably didn't get married that old. She far outlived her husband. So we can say, even if she was 25 when she had her daughter, and her daughter is 25, both on the older age of probability, that would put her at 50. And yet, she is played by Judi Dench in the 2006 adaptation, who was 70 years old. I have nothing but love for Judi Dench. But she was 70 years old when she was played as Lady Catherine de Bourgh. And Lady Catherine de Bourgh is not an old woman. She is an annoying woman. She is not an old woman. That's it. That's all I wanted to talk about. I just really feel like in adaptations, it really markedly affects our understanding of these characters if we cast them as much, much older than they are. The same thing happens in Sense and Sensibility, though. Colonel Brandon is played by, I can't remember his name, the guy who plays Snape. He was like 50 years old. Colonel Brandon's like 35. This is way different. A 35-year-old, it's not much better, but it is significantly different. It's way, way different. That's all I have to say. Anyway. That's it. That's the rant. That's the silly rant. We're done with it. We're going to move on. This is Reading with Steven. I am Steven. And this video is part of my series of Bookshelf A to Z, where I try to read all of the books that I own from A to Z by author's last name. In this video, we're going to be talking about Pride and Prejudice, hence why we were talking about Mrs. Bennet and Lady Catherine. But we're going to be talking about Pride and Prejudice by Jane Austen. Great novel. One of my favorites. Probably the book I've reread the most in my life. Read it first when I was like 12-ish, something like that. Did not understand it at the time, but really appreciate it now. First written and published in 1812. It deals with the Bennet family and their, specifically Elizabeth Bennet, the second eldest Bennet daughter, and her enemies to lovers romance with Mr. Darcy, a very rich and uncompromising gentleman. If you want to know the plot to the novel, which you should before you watch this, you go read the plot on Wikipedia or read the book itself, go wild. if you're gonna watch an adaptation, I think the 1996 BBC adaptation is the best. The one with Jennifer L. and Colin Firth. That's the more book accurate version. Although I will say, I do cap for the 2006 Keira Knightley version as well. I think it's very, very well made movie. Not particularly accurate, but very well made. So do with that what you will. But again, go watch one of those. Read the book, or even just the Wikipedia summary if you want to know the plot of the novel, which you should do before, because I'm going to spoil. I don't care about spoilers in these books, especially for books written over 200 years ago. It just is what it is, you know? Can't talk about books without spoiling them. Pride and Prejudice, more so than I think any other Jane Austen novel, deals with money. Um, and because of that, I think it's really important for us to understand exactly how much money the characters have. Mr. Bennet has an estate worth £2,000 per annum. Mr. Bingley is described as having £5,000 per annum, and Mr. Darcy at £10,000 per annum. But how much money is that? Especially for those of us who don't use the Great British Pound. How do we understand that as money? Now, Donald Gray, who is the editor of the Norton Critical Edition that I have, does have a note on money, and he talks about the various ways in which we can, I think, easily understand the money. The most obvious way of doing so is just to throw it into a inflation calculator, bring it out up to now, and then translate that into whatever currency you want. That would give Mr. Bennet around £120,000, Bingley £300,000, and Mr. Darcy £600,000 per year. Or if you're American, or just understand dollar values better than pounds, that would be $157,000, $392,000, and $785,000, respectively. This doesn't really explain it, because while that's a lot of money, it's not like a lot of money, if you get what I'm saying. Like, $157,000 a year is what, a pharmacist in the United States would be making. Which, again, a lot, but it's not Mr. Bennet wealthy, right? It's not owning a farm estate where you and your wife and your $5 live in relative peace with your servants and your cooks and your farm hands, and you're like, that doesn't, it's a lot, but it's not like a lot. And there is the problem with converting, with just straight inflation converting and whatnot. Better, perhaps, would be to calculate it based off of the average wage of an hourly worker in Britain in 1810. So a skilled laborer in 1810 makes about 55 to 90 pounds per year, which Mr. Bennet would be making 20 to 40 times that amount. Now, a skilled tradesman in the UK today, I believe I used an electrician as the skilled tradesman, makes about £33,000 per year, according to the Office of National Statistics, which would mean that if we translate that £33,000 multiplied by 20 to 40 times, we get somewhere in the range of $650,000 to $1.3 million for Mr. Bennet, which seems significantly more likely. That just seems a lot more likely of an amount, given what he is described as being. He's described as having an income that is the wealthiest in the Meryton area. So that seems to me a lot more plausible. It would give Mr. Bingley $5-ish million a year, and Mr. Darcy about $10-ish million a year, which again still seems kind of low for those two, but it's closer to Mr. Bennet's, for what I would imagine Mr. Bennet is making. Now, with Darcy and Bingley, of course, we also have to account for the very different economy that existed in 1810, which is one in which there's far fewer consumer goods to spend on, to spend your money on. You know, you're not paying for a phone or internet or anything like that, but you are paying more for wood to heat your house. You're paying land tax based on your estates, which Mr. Darcy, Mr. Bennet, and Mr. Bingley all have. And probably more significantly, though, things like food are produced on your own farming estates. So you're not really paying for your food anymore, but you are paying more money for horses, you know, which probably comparable to cars today, as far as price goes, if not a little more expensive. The linen, your clothes are way more expensive because they're being handmade. Art, obviously, is something that you're spending a lot more money on. You know, stuff like this would be more expensive, but is not something the average person is taking care of. So it takes less money to make a competence, so to be an independent person, but that would mean that they are having as much money as they do. The difference between, you know, 500 pounds, which is what the Dashwoods have in Sense and Sensibility, and the 10,000 pounds that Mr. Darcy has, or even the 2,000 pounds that Mr. Bennet has, is a huge gap. So, I don't know. I guess it would exponentially increase how much money you would have as it went up. It wouldn't be like a linear increase. It would be more of an exponential increase because there would just be less things to spend your money on, and therefore you would have more money to spend on luxuries, if that makes sense. But more or less, I think for, you know, the average person reading the book, unless you're a historian or an economist, the best thing to know is that Mr. Bennet, the most important thing to know is that everybody in this book is filthy rich. Everybody in all of Jane Austen's works is well off, but in this book in particular, they're all rich. But Mr. Bingley is very wealthy, and Mr. Darcy is unbelievably wealthy. Is, I think, the best that you could do. So overall, I don't know that it really changes the story, but I do think it's important to remember that, to note the relative values of money, of their incomes, and what the Bennets would reasonably be expected to marry into. Of all Austen's novels, Pride and Prejudice is probably the most quintessentially romantic in our modern sense of the word. For a longer discussion on what is for a longer discussion on what romance is, see my last video on Sense and Sensibility. Pride and Prejudice is about love. More specifically, it is about marriage and what makes a good marriage, how to find a good marriage partner, and whether or not a marriage should be based on economics or on the sentimental feelings of the two partners, whether they are temperamentally matched. But always throughout the novel, it is about marriage is always framed as an economic proposition for the women involved. Indeed, even in the first line of the novel, we can see the economic nature of marriage. It is a truth universally acknowledged that a single man in possession of good fortune must be in want of a wife. It is not just any man, it is a rich man, a man in possession of a good fortune, that is in want of a wife. And this is, of course, because women do not have incomes of their own, not traditionally. Some heiresses will, of course, and there are heiresses throughout the Austen novels, but for the vast majority of them, the only money that they're going to have is their husbands, or, you know, their fathers or their brothers. Indeed, that is what happened to Jane Austen. Jane Austen never got married, and when her father died, it was her brothers who had to supplement Jane's income, which was not very much, We see this particular dynamic in place with the Lucases. When Charlotte Lucas agrees to marry Mr. Collins, we can see her. We are shown her family's reaction to the news. Quote, Lady Lucas began directly to calculate with more interest than the matter had ever excited before how many years longer Mr. Bennet was likely to live, and Sir William gave it as a decided opinion that whenever Mr. Collins should be in possession of the Longbourn estate, it would be highly expedient that both he and his wife should make their appearance at St. James's. The whole family, in short, were properly overjoyed on the occasion. The younger girls formed hopes of coming out a year or two sooner than they might otherwise have done, and the boys were relieved from their apprehension of Charlotte's dying an old maid. Charlotte herself was tolerably composed. She had gained her point and had time to consider of it. Her reflections were in general satisfactory. Mr. Collins, to be sure, was neither sensible nor agreeable. His society was irksome, and his attachment to her must be imaginary. But still, he would be her husband. Without thinking highly either of men or of matrimony, marriage had always been her object. It was the only honorable position for well-educated young women of small fortune, and however uncertain of giving happiness, must be their pleasantest preservative from want. We see that Charlotte's family is overjoyed, obviously, because they get rid of a daughter whom they love, a daughter and sister whom they love, but don't really want to have to take care of. But Charlotte herself recognizes that for her, it is an economic necessity to get married. It is an economic expedience to get married, to have her own place, her own independence. Well, pseudo-independence, obviously. It is based on her husband. And I think that we are inclined to recall what Marianne said of marriage, that 27-year-old women don't fall in love. They just get married because they need someone to take care of them. Now, at the time, I did say Marianne was being very unkind, and maybe it wasn't just Marianne who was unkind. Maybe it was Jane Austen herself who was unkind, given the fact that she fell in love early in her life and never seemingly again did, and thus, perhaps, it was Jane Austen who was unkind. Indeed, Charlotte must have spoken for many a woman when she says, quote, I am not romantic, you know. I never was. I ask only a comfortable home, and considering Mr. Collins's character, connections, and situation in life, I am convinced that my chance of happiness with him is as fair as most people can boast on entering the marriage state. Now, Charlotte isn't alone in thinking of marriage as an economic prospect. With the entail of Mr. Bennet's estate to Mr. Collins when he dies, meaning that his wife and daughters will get almost nothing to live off of after his death, it is imperative for the Bennets to also consider marriage an economic necessity. An economic necessity, it's worth noting, that really only one person seems to understand, and that is Mrs. Bennet, who always thinks in terms of money when it comes to marriage. Almost to a fault. Well, not almost to a fault, especially to a fault that she does this. She calculates out how much money Jane will have if she marries Mr. Bingley, how fine the carriages will be when Mr. Darcy offers to marry Elizabeth, and so on and so forth. And even with Lydia, when she elopes with Mr. Wickham, even in that sense, Mrs. Bennet is still thrilled at the prospect, because she knows that even a bad marriage is better than no marriage at all when it comes to her daughter's well-being. A questionable assessment, maybe, but it is one that she makes, and one that arouses excitement in her at the prospect of the marriage. But is there not more to marriage than the economic value of the partnership? Could other things be taken into account? And there is. And the book mentions them as well, specifically the dynastic implications of marriage. This is given by Lady Catherine when talking about the potential marriage between Mr. Darcy and Lady Catherine's daughter. My daughter and my nephew are formed for each other. They are descended on the maternal side from the same noble line, and on the father's from respectable, honorable, and ancient, though untitled families. Their fortune on both sides is splendid. They are destined for each other by the voice of every member of their respective houses, and what is to divide them? The upstart pretensions of a young woman without family, connections, or fortune. Is this to be endured? But it must not, shall not be. And again, when discussing the prospects of Elizabeth and Mr. Darcy's marriage, to all the objections I have already urged, I have still another to add. I am no stranger to the particulars of your youngest sister's infamous elopement. I know it all, that the young man's marrying her was a patched-up business at the expense of your father and uncle. And is such a girl to be my nephew's sister? Is her husband, is the son of his late father's steward to be his brother? Heaven and earth! Of what are you thinking? Are the shades of Pemberley to be thus polluted? Now, Lady Catherine obviously doesn't really fully know the story of Mr. Wickham and Miss Darcy. So for her, the problem with Wickham is that he's a poor person. He's of a lower social class. And to be so familially connected to somebody of such a low class is for her an extreme problem. Now, Lady Catherine's ideas of dynastic marriage are roundly disparaged by the book. And with good reason, of course. With the revolution in America and the revolution in France, in particular, happening just before the novels were written, within Austen's lifetime, even the conservative England was starting to change from that dynastic sense into the more modern ideas that it doesn't matter who your parents are, it matters how much money you have, and also how much of a gentleman you act. Even Mr. Darcy, who in the beginning of the novel disparages Elizabeth's aunt and uncle for being merchants, later comes to realize that the Gardiners are some of the best, I think they would refer to them as well-bred, but they are the best acting people within the novel. They are the most gentlemanlike of all of the characters within the novel, and are consequently, after Elizabeth and Darcy's marriage, always welcome to come to Pemberley, which is something that most of Elizabeth's family is not welcome to do. Happiness and compatibility is also something that we need to take into account of. Marriage is not just an economic prospect. You have to live with the people you married, right? You have to live and, be with the people you married. And to this end, we have an example of somebody who is very unhappily and temperamentally unhappily married. Most notable, i.e., the Bennets. Mr. and Mrs. Bennet are not a good marriage. And we are told that, had Elizabeth's opinion been all drawn from her own family, she could not have formed a very pleasing picture of conjugal felicity or domestic comfort. Her father, captivated by youth and beauty, and that appearance of good humor which youth and beauty generally give, had married a woman whose weak understanding and illiberal mind had very early in their marriage put an end to all real affection for her. Respect, esteem, and confidence had vanished forever, and all his views of domestic happiness were overthrown. To his wife he was very little otherwise indebted than as her ignorance and folly had contributed to his amusement. This is not the sort of happiness which a man would in general wish to owe his wife. Now, obviously, that quote makes it seem like Mrs. Bennet is the problem. But Elizabeth notes that even her father is not nice to her mother, and that he is a bad husband too. He openly mocks his wife in front of their children, and does not force his daughters to respect their mother the way that a proper father would do in a proper marriage. And so we see it is important to be happy with your marriage, to be of the correct mindset when getting married. One cannot just be temperamentally mismatched in that way. And that is something that Mr. Bennet does try to save Elizabeth from. When Darcy asks Mr. Bennet for his daughter's hand in marriage, Mr. Bennet talks to Elizabeth and says, are you crazy? You don't even like this man. You can't marry a man that you don't like, that you don't respect, uh, just because he's rich. You shouldn't do that. That is a bad idea, and you will be unhappy for the rest of your life. Now, of course, it turns out that Elizabeth is in love with Mr. Darcy, and it all works out. But I think it is telling that Mr. Bennet would try to dissuade his daughter from making the same choice that Charlotte Lucas made, and which overjoyed the Lucases. He, being in a bad marriage, Mr. Bennet being in a bad marriage, tries to save his daughter from a similar bad marriage. And so we are left with the best form of marriage being one which seems to marry all three ideas. The economic prospects, obviously, Elizabeth and Darcy are going to be economically compatible. They are now wealthy enough that they don't have to worry about economics. They are in love with each other and thus temperamentally engaged. And as Elizabeth says, Mr. Darcy is a gentleman and Elizabeth is a gentleman's daughter, and therefore, though not as grand an idea of dynastic marriage as Lady Catherine might think, it is a respectable marriage. Mr. Darcy would not be considered to be marrying below his status. This being the most traditionally romantic of all of Austen's work, we know that Elizabeth is going to be economically taken care of. She's going to be rich, and she's going to be in love with Mr. Darcy. But we are forced to ask, when did Elizabeth first fall in love with Mr. Darcy? It was not when he proposed marriage to her, obviously, and it was not even when he helped to save her sister. She was in love with him before then already. So when was it? It was upon first seeing Pemberley. When she and the Gardiners first visit Pemberley, quote, "They gradually ascended for half a mile, and then found themselves at the top of a considerable eminence, where the wood ceased, and the eye was instantly caught by Pemberley House, situated on the opposite side of a valley, into which the road with some abruptness wound. It was a large, handsome stone building, standing well on rising ground, and backed by a ridge of high, woody hills, and in front a stream of some natural importance was swelled into greater, but without any artificial appearance. Its banks were neither formal nor falsely adorned. Elizabeth was delighted. She had never seen a place for which nature had done more, or where natural beauty had been so little counteracted by an awkward taste. They were all of them warm and in their admiration, and at that moment she felt that to be the mistress of Pemberley might be something." This is the moment in which Elizabeth first starts to fall in love with Darcy. It's not his kindness, it's not his warmth, it's not his familial love. It's when she sees his land. And she makes a joke later on to Jane about how it was when she first saw Pemberley, is when she first fell in love, and Jane tells her to be serious. But I think there is something to be said about that. I think she is being serious. That seeing Pemberley does flip something in her mind of, oh my God, this is wealth. This is money. I could be rich. Now, I won't be so crass as to imply that Elizabeth is just mercenary in her love. I think there is also a lot of subtext going on of seeing how Mr. Darcy's taste in how he lives, in how well he treats his servants, in how, the idea that it would be a natural beauty and that it wouldn't be destroyed by bad taste, I think we're supposed to understand that as reflecting on Mr. Darcy as a person as well. I just think it's funny that also happens to be the moment where she falls in love. A book which is ostensibly so romantic, even one of the great love stories of literature, is about money. I just think that's funny. It's uncharitable, but it is funny. Either way, regardless, we can see in Pride and Prejudice how the three views of marriage, the economic, the love, and the dynastic views of marriage do come together to create tension to create the tension that we find in the book. And obviously, again, all the best marriages are a combination of those three things, which Elizabeth and Jane are able to find uh, very neatly. The book ties itself together very neatly at the end, in a way that I think shows that Austen was correct in later recognizing that the work is probably too light and bright and sparkling within its tone. So it's a quick discussion on Pride and Prejudice. I could probably talk ad infinitum about Pride and Prejudice and all of Austen's novels, but again, one does need to um, limit oneself eventually. Obviously, I'm not writing. I'm a poor video editor, and I do not want to be video editing, a 3-hour video on Pride and Prejudice, which I probably could do, but I don't want to do it. I'm not that kind of man. I'm not that kind of person. I'll talk about it, but I'm not gonna do the video editing for it. This is the problem. And these videos do not make enough money to pay for somebody else to do the video editing. Uh, which, by the way, I should mention this. Please like, subscribe, comment before I forget. Sometimes I forget. Do that. I like it. It makes me feel good inside when people do that, and I hope that you will do it. But both because it helps the channel, but also because I just like it. I just think it's fun. I like going in, seeing the likes, and the occasional comments. The only comments I ever get are for Jerlaine of all videos. The first video, Jerlaine, the one book that I don't think anybody's ever read before. That's the only one that people comment on. I think it's a shared sense of, oh my god, somebody else has read this book. But that's neither here nor there. Feel free to leave your comments on Pride and Prejudice. The next book is going to be Mansfield Park. It's a much denser book than Pride and Prejudice is anyway. Much darker book, I think. But yeah. If you've gotten this far in the video, thank you. Thank you very much for watching. I appreciate it. Even if you don't like, subscribe, and comment, which I hope you will. I still appreciate you watching it, and I hope that it was entertaining and valuable for understanding books, because I think it's important not just to read books, but to contemplate them, to discuss them, and to really think about them. And I think these kinds of discussions, they help me, I know, and I hope they help you. But I'm Steven. This is Reading with Steven. Thank you again, and go out, continue reading.